Hi, my name is Jay Andrews and welcome to Laguna Tools. Today we're going to do a little bit of bandsaw setup and adjustment. And we'll start off with the bandsaw and kind of go through a few of the features and the components on it. And we'll do a blade change, a guide adjustment, and kind of walk you through the process. Now first off, you're going to notice I have a very small blade on this. This is a 1/4 inch blade. And a 1/4 inch blade is great for doing detailed shapes, curves, tiny circles, and things like that. You might do a cut very similar to this piece right here, where you've got some compound curves on it. But if I want to do some straight line resawing, I want to put on a much wider blade. I'm going to take this block of wood and we're going to do a resaw cut on it. We'll cut off a few veneers and have a look at that. But I don't want to do that with a 1/4 inch blade. I'm going to switch over. We'll put a 1 inch blade on this and I'll show you the process right now. First thing we want to do is open the cabinet doors. Now on this bandsaw, when you open the cabinet doors, there's a micro switch that shuts off the saw, but just to be safe, I'm going to push the bump switch. We'll shut off the saw, and now I know that my hand is around the blade. I'm not worried about it starting. If your bandsaw doesn't have this type of switch on the door or on the bump switch, make sure to unplug your bandsaw before you start touching or handling the blade. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to take the tension off of the bandsaw blade, and that's done right here with the wheel. This bandsaw happens to have the wheel right here. Some of them will have them up on top of the bandsaw. But take the tension off, loosen the blade. We'll pull the pin that locks the two table halves together. Open the door. And then slide the blade out through the frame slot, through the table slot. And now we have the blade off. And while we've got this blade off, you can hang the blades in a long position like this, or you can coil the blade. And I'm going to show you how to coil a blade very easy. There's a lot of people that have a lot of different techniques. And the one that I find is easiest is I hold the blade with my hands a little wider than shoulder width apart, my palms up, my thumbs out, and I'll grab a hold of the blade. Now you might want to do this with gloves so that the blade doesn't cut you, but I'm going to go ahead and do it barehanded here. Grab a hold of the blade and begin to bring your hands together and cross your hands, and that'll form a circle at the top here. You'll start forming your second circle and you'll lift your bottom. And there you have it. There's 3 nice concentric circles, and it makes it much easier to hang and to store your blades. Okay, now that we have the small 1/4 inch blade off, we're going to get ready and get set up for the 1 inch blade or the 1 1/4 inch blade that I have here. And in order to do that, what I need to do is I need to make sure that the guides are backed off. And to do that on this bandsaw, you take the Allen wrench. There's 2 set screws on the bottom. Just loosen those. I slide the guide back, and I'll take the thrust bearing and I'll loosen it and push it back as well. And I also want to loosen the side guides and spread those out. I'll do the same thing on the bottom, where I come down, loosen the bottom guide. It's just a quick push, loosen the thrust bearing, and slide the whole assembly back. Now that I have the guides out of the way, I can put a blade on and I can tension it and track it properly without interference from the guides, and then we'll bring the guides forward. So let me grab the 1 inch blade. And again, use caution when you uncoil these ones because they can spring out and they can grab a hold of you. And there we go. We're going to flip that one right side out. Teeth down on the right hand side. Installation is just the reverse of removal. I'm going to put it in the frame side first, slide it behind the fence rail, in through the slot on the frame, and then again I'm going to loosely hang this over the top wheel just so that it can hang up there. And I'm going to start lining it up all the way down. I'll start lining it up in the blade slot of the table, through the throat plate, loosely line it with the guides, and come down and begin to loosely line it up over the bottom wheel and in the bottom guides. Now since everything is loose, I can slide it right in with no problem. I will loosely center it by my hands to make sure that the blade is pretty well centered on the bandsaw tire. Now with the blade in place, I'm going to start adding just a little bit of tension to the blade, and I want to watch as I bring the tension up just to make sure that the blade is where it's supposed to be, make sure it's kind of lined up with the guides. And I'll put just a couple of turns of tension on it and then just give it a quick spin. And what I'm looking for is I want to make sure that it's not binding up or catching on anything. So I'll give that a quick spin. I like where it's at. Now I want to go through and set the tension on the bandsaw blade. Now this tension gauge, it actually has a little gauge on the side right here, an indicator that lets you know what the blade tension should be. On this one here, I've got an 1 1/4 inch blade. I'm going to set it at about 30 on the window. So as I crank the tension up, you notice that the numbers change in the window, and this is very easy to see and very easy to adjust. On this blade, I'm going to bring it up until I see 30 in the window, and I'm all set. It makes the blade setting very, very easy. I can check it by coming up and touching the blade, and I'll just take my thumb and make sure I've got about a 1/4 inch deflection on the blade. Now you may notice that some blades take a little more or a little less pressure to do that, but again, right here on the long side where there's no guidance in play, about a 1/4 inch of play is all you need. Now that we have the blade properly tensioned, we want to go through and make sure that it's tracking just fine. So now we've got it up to proper tension. Now I'm going to give it a spin and see how it's riding on the bandsaw tires. And really this looks pretty good, but I'm going to show you what tracking does to the bandsaw. When you track the wheels, there's a knob on the back that you twist, and it'll actually angle the upper wheel assembly to allow the blade to track a little further or a little back on the bandsaw tire. And if you watch very closely right here, you'll see the teeth of the bandsaw blade are even with the edge of the tire right now. And as I spin this, I'm going to turn the tracking knob to walk that blade forward off of the tire and then back onto it. So when you put your finger through here, make sure you don't go too far in so you hit the frame of the saw and hurt yourself. So give it a nice spin. And as I'm spinning the wheel, I'm turning the tension knob or the tracking knob in the back. And you'll notice that this blade walked quite a bit forward and the teeth are hanging well off the edge of the tire. Now in order for me to set that backwards, I'll go ahead and give it a spin, and while I'm spinning it, I would just loosely turn that knob, and it's a small fine adjustment. If you have to make any big turns of the knob, you know you're doing something wrong or that it may be grossly out of adjustment. So small turns. Don't do this with the bandsaw running. You want to do this by hand so you can watch the blade and make sure that it doesn't jump off the wheel if it was very far out. Now I like where that's tracking right now. So we've done the tension, we've done the tracking. Now that the tracking is set, I will lock the handle in the back to make sure that the tracking stays adjusted. And then we're going to go through, button up the saw, and then adjust the guides. To button up the saw, I close the door. There's the small pin that drops back in the table, and that locks the two table halves together. Now we're going to adjust the guides. And any time that you're adjusting the upper guides, you want to make sure that the lock knob for the upper guide post is locked. There's a flat side on this post that locks and squares the upper guide post assembly. You want to make sure it's locked in place because any adjustments that you do will need to have the upper guide post firmly locked in place. The first adjustment we do is we bring the guide system forward, and we want to bring it forward to match the width of the blade. And you're looking at the ceramics, and these ceramics are the little white pieces right here in the blue blocks. The ceramics want to be about 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch behind the gullet or the cutout of the tooth. So we'll bring those forward, and I'll loosely pull it through. Now that I like where those are set, I will twist them just a little bit by finger. I'll grab a number 6 Allen wrench and just snug them. You don't have to crank on these. Again, this is a small screw. It's going through aluminum into aluminum. You really don't have to crank on it. A lot of people want to put too much pressure and really tighten these down. It's just a nice light little twist. That sets the guide backward and forward for the width of the blade. The next step is to adjust the thrust bearing. Now this one uses a ceramic button here for the thrust bearing as well. And that thrust bearing keeps the blade from getting pushed back into the guides and getting the teeth into the side guides. We will bring this up right to the back edge of the blade and just very lightly touch the back of the blade. Now these blades come from the factory pretty well dressed. If you have a different type of blade or a different brand of blade, it may have a sharp edge on the back. If it does, you can true that or actually round it over with a little honing stone or a diamond stone. You'll do that with your hands out of the way while the bandsaw is running, and when you do that, you want to make sure that your stone is placed flat against the table so that it can't be jerked from your hands. Bring it up and just lightly kiss the back of the blade and go from side to side to dress the back of the blade. And like I said, the Resaw King blade comes pretty well dressed up, and that'll take care of the thrust bearing adjustment of the top. Now I'm going to go to the side guides. And again, we're using ceramics, and the ceramics have a really great advantage over using standard metal bearings. And the advantage is I can take these ceramics and come up and just touch the blade. The ceramic handles the heat just fine, and on this Swedish silicon steel here, it rides very nice. There's very little friction on it. Now the ceramics can actually be individually replaced, and we'll cover that in a later section here. Now the ceramics work well on blades from 1/4 inch like we just had on here, all the way up to the maximum width of the saw. In this case here, it'll go up to 1 3/8. So I'll bring this up. I'm just going to touch the blade. I don't want to move or deflect the blade like this. I want to come up and just touch the blade. Lock that down, and again, it's just a thumb screw on this, so it sets very easy. And I'll do the same from the other side. Now, most of the time I'm standing up in front and watching this. I'm going to do it from the back here so you can see it. I'll come up, just kiss the blade lightly. If you put too much pressure or force on those two, you can actually pinch the blade where it makes it where the blade does not want to go through the guides. It actually will pinch it, and you'll have trouble with the blade binding up. That covers the upper guide post adjustment. Let's go to the bottom set of guides and do the same thing. The bottom guides are just the same. They're just upside down. Now the bottom guides, you'll notice have two slots on them, and they can actually be raised and lowered. You can actually raise them up right underneath the table. I've got them drop down a little bit here just to make it a little easier to adjust and a little easier to see. If they're in the far up position, please note that if you do any type of work with the table tilted, that the table can come in contact with the guides and you may have to drop them down a little bit. The first thing I want to do again is to bring the guides forward just like we did on the top guides, and I want to set them just behind the gullet or cut out of the tooth. I will tighten the bolt just a little bit by hand. I'll come up in here with the Allen wrench, slide it right in, and give it just a little bit of a turn. It doesn't take much. And the thrust bearing, there's a set screw on the side right here that loosens it. It comes forward and again just barely touches the blade. Now one note on the thrust bearing is you want to turn that thrust bearing about once every 8 hours of operation on the saw. So we'll give that a little turn right now, bring it forward, just touch the blade. Lock that down, and we'll do the side guide adjustments. Now the side guide adjustments are just the same as the top. I'll bring this in from the side, and I just want to just barely touch the blade. If you're unsure about the blade setting, or if you have a blade that has a thick weld, what you may want to do is just put a piece of paper in between the guide and the blade, tighten the guide down, and remove the piece of paper for a little bit of clearance. And that's usually if you only have a bad weld.